Long ago in the land of Israel, there lived a prophet chosen by God to deliver messages to his people. The Bible, specifically in 1 Kings 13, tells the somber story of a prophet who faced a tragic fate. This tale is not only about a man and a lion, but carries profound lessons about obedience, trust, and divine justice. Though seemingly perplexing, this story reveals much about God's expectations and his mysterious ways. The prophet was sent to rebuke King Jeroboam of Israel for leading the nation into idolatry. Jeroboam, wanting to distance the people from the worship of God in Jerusalem, had established his own places of worship and crafted golden calves. This angered God, who wanted his people to stay true to him. In response, God sent the prophet to deliver a stern warning to Jeroboam about the consequences of his actions. God gave specific instructions to the prophet for this mission. He was to deliver the message to Jeroboam, then immediately leave without stopping to eat, drink, or even rest along the way. These orders were clear and emphasized the gravity of his task. It wasn't merely a test of endurance, but an instruction to demonstrate the seriousness of God's words against idolatry. The prophet followed God's orders, journeying to Bethel where he found Jeroboam at the altar. Boldly, he pronounced the Lord's judgment, declaring that the altar would be torn apart and the ashes would be poured out as a sign of God's displeasure. In that moment, God's power was displayed when the altar cracked, a shocking sight that terrified those present, including the king. Enraged by the prophet's words, Jeroboam stretched out his hand to command his men to seize him. But as he did so, his hand suddenly withered, paralyzed by God's power. Only after the prophet prayed for healing did Jeroboam's hand return to normal, demonstrating the prophet's authority and God's mercy even in judgment. Humbled, the king offered the prophet a meal as a gesture of respect. Remembering God's command, the prophet declined the king's invitation. He explained that God had forbidden him from eating, drinking, or resting in that place. His obedience to God was paramount, even if the king himself offered him hospitality. Thus the prophet began his journey home, resolved to honor God's instructions without deviation. News of the prophet's bold declaration and miraculous signs soon spread across Bethel and beyond. People marveled at the events, with some fearing God's power while others were angered by the prophet's interference in their worship practices. Among those who heard was an old prophet who also lived in Bethel, a man with a complex past and divided loyalties. Upon hearing the news, the old prophet grew curious and set out to find the younger prophet. He sent his sons to locate him, eager to meet the man who had shown such courage and authority in his words against Jeroboam's idolatry. The old prophet's motivations were a blend of curiosity, admiration, and perhaps jealousy. After finding him, the old prophet invited the young prophet to his home for food and rest. At first, the young prophet refused, reiterating that God had commanded him not to eat or drink in Bethel. He was determined to obey God's command, even when faced with temptation from a fellow prophet. However, the old prophet persisted and deceitfully claimed that an angel of God had spoken to him, instructing him to bring the young prophet to his home. The younger prophet, trusting the old prophet's words, relented and accepted the invitation, convinced that the older prophet had received a true message from God. Unfortunately, this decision would lead to tragic consequences. As they dined together, the word of the Lord came to the old prophet, revealing the error of the young prophet's decision. God pronounced judgment on the young prophet for his disobedience in breaking the command. Though the older prophet had lied, the responsibility for the decision lay with the young prophet. This proclamation was a sorrowful moment, casting a dark shadow over their meal. The young prophet was stricken with regret, realizing the severity of his error. Yet it was too late to undo his actions. Despite his initial obedience and faithfulness, he had allowed himself to be misled, placing human words above God's direct instruction. His journey back to Judah would now be marked by this tragic mistake. After finishing the meal, the young prophet departed, knowing that his fate had been sealed by his disobedience. He rode along the road, perhaps reflecting on the choices he had made and the consequences that awaited him. The gravity of the moment weighed heavily upon him, for he knew God's judgments were always fulfilled. As the young prophet traveled along the road, a lion suddenly appeared and attacked him, killing him instantly. The lion did not consume the prophet's body, nor did it harm the donkey upon which he rode. This unusual scene was a divine sign, a fulfillment of God's judgment, and a warning to all who might question his ways. Passers-by who saw the lion standing beside the prophet's body were struck with fear and awe. Word quickly spread about the prophet's tragic fate, and many were puzzled by the sight of a lion and a donkey standing guard over the body, neither attacking nor fleeing. It was a scene that defied natural behavior, underscoring the divine nature of the incident. The old prophet heard of the young prophet's death and went to retrieve his body. Moved by sorrow and guilt, he brought the body back to Bethel and mourned over him. He recognized that his own deception had contributed to this tragedy, and his remorse was profound. He buried the young prophet in his own tomb, honoring him as a true servant of God. This story is often perplexing to readers who wonder why God allowed such a harsh judgment. Yet it highlights the importance of obedience to God's commands. Even prophets who are called to represent God's word are not exempt from his laws. The tragic end serves as a reminder that God's instructions must be upheld above all else. Through this account, God showed that he is just and impartial. The prophet's punishment was not for cruelty, but to underscore the principle of obedience. The young prophet was loved by God, yet his disobedience could not be overlooked. God's justice is perfect, even when it seems severe from a human perspective. Additionally, this story reveals the power of influence and the dangers of deception. The old prophet's lie, though seemingly small, led to tragic consequences. It reminds believers to seek discernment and to be cautious in whom they trust, especially when it comes to matters of faith and obedience. God's love for his people is evident in his desire for them to remain faithful. The young prophet's story was a warning to Israel, calling them to consider their own actions and relationship with God. If even a prophet faced judgment, how much more would they face consequences for turning away from God's commands? This story teaches modern believers about the importance of unwavering obedience to God's word. In a world filled with distractions and alternative voices, it's crucial to stay anchored to God's instructions. Temptations and seemingly harmless deviations can lead to devastating outcomes if not carefully guarded against. The young prophet's story also emphasizes the need for personal responsibility. While the old prophet misled him, the younger prophet's decision was ultimately his own. Believers today are called to examine their own choices, ensuring they align with God's will rather than relying solely on the words of others. The incident serves as a reminder that God's ways are higher than human understanding. His judgments, though sometimes incomprehensible to us, are always grounded in his perfect wisdom and justice. Faith in his sovereignty and trust in his plan are key for believers who may not always understand why certain things happen. Furthermore, this story challenges believers to be cautious with spiritual authority. Not everyone who claims to speak for God is a true messenger, as evidenced by the old prophet's deception. Discernment is essential, especially in a world where many voices claim divine inspiration. The prophet's fate was tragic, but it was not without purpose. Through his story, God issued a clear call to Israel and to all future readers to uphold his commandments with integrity. This lesson endures for believers today, urging them to value God's word above all. The sad story of the prophet killed by a lion carries lessons that echo through the ages. It's a tale of faith, obedience, and the sobering reality of God's justice. While the prophet's life ended tragically, his legacy serves as a warning and a reminder of the importance of faithful adherence to God's commands. For believers, the story is a call to obedience, a reminder of the consequences of wavering in faith. It underscores the importance of seeking God's will and heeding his voice above all others. The young prophet's story is both a caution and an encouragement to walk closely with God. Through this story, God reminds his people of the need for discernment. The old prophet's deception highlights the importance of distinguishing between true and false messages. Believers are called to be vigilant, testing every word and aligning it with God's truth. The young prophet's legacy is a somber one, yet it holds valuable lessons. His obedience, though imperfect, shows that even well-intentioned servants must adhere closely to God's guidance. His fate serves as a cautionary tale for those who might be tempted to stray from God's instructions.